Hello everyone, my name is Elena, and today I'm going to show you how to connect the Power Platform with Azure Functions and OpenAI. Now, in order to demonstrate this technology, I'll first provide you with a use case scenario. Let's say we have a help desk system in which users submit support tickets and an agent is assigned to help them resolve their issue. What we want is to dynamically assign an agent based on the ticket description and match that to the agent's specialty. So first, I'll show you my finished app in action, and then I'll describe the technology behind it, and I'll show you how you can create it for yourself. Here you can see the architecture of our project. Our tickets and surrounding data will be stored in Dataverse, and when we edit this data in our model-driven app, a Power Automate flow will be called, which will trigger an Azure function. Our function needs our Dataverse credentials in order to access that data, so we will use a Microsoft Entra app registration. Our function will also call an OpenAI deployment, which will determine the nature of the ticket and determine which agent is best to assign to each ticket. Once we determine the category and the agent that best suit the ticket description, our function will then post that information back to Dataverse. Our very first step is going to be creating our schema within Dataverse. Alright, so we're here in the Power Apps portal, make.powerapps.com. I'm going to navigate to Tables, and I'm going to select Get Started with Copilot. Now, the first thing that I'm going to tell it is to create several tables and to define the relationships between them. Next, I'm going to tell it to create our ticket table, which has the columns Ticket ID, Category ID, Agent ID, Status ID, and subject description and priority. Our next table is going to be our agent table, and it's going to have the columns Agent ID, name, specialty category, and email. Our next table is going to be the category table, which is going to have the columns category ID and category name. Now, our last table that we'll define here is going to be the status table, which will have status ID and status. So I'll go ahead and click generate, and it'll work very hard to set up our tables. Alright, now you can see it has generated an ERD. I'm just going to move these around a little bit to give you the best view of our relationships. And you see our relationships are correctly defined. And I'm just going to add an existing table. Now the table that we want to add is the system user table. These are going to be our users that will submit tickets to the help desk. So I'll press View Options, View Data, and we'll want to create a new column. This column that we're creating will be the users department. Now what we want to do is create a relationship with the ticket table. So I'll select ticket, and I'll add a display name. I'll just call it user, and we'll go ahead and save that. Now, as you can see, our user table has a relationship with our ticket table, and our user column is there in the ticket table. Now you can go ahead and click Save and Exit. Now, as you can see, if you go to Tables and Custom, you can see all of our custom tables that we have just created. Now, if I click on the ticket table and scroll down, I have already populated these tables with sample data, which I have provided in my GitHub repository, which is in the description. Now let's go to Apps, and we are going to create our model-driven app. I'll select Start with the Page Design, scroll down, and select View and Form to create a model-driven app. I'm going to name my app Help Desk Demo, and select Create. Now we're going to select our tables that we want to be included in our app. I just want the ticket table so that our users can create new tickets. You can see my sample data here has been populated in our app. Now our next step will be to create an app registration in Microsoft Entra, which will allow our function to authenticate to Dataverse. Now in the Azure portal, we're going to want to create an app registration for Dataverse. So we'll go to Microsoft Entra ID, we'll scroll down, and we'll click App Registrations. We'll click New Registration, and I'm going to name my app Dataverse Access. I already have mine created, so I will just go to that, and I'll scroll down and click View API Permissions. Now this is important. You're going to want to add a permission, and you'll search for Dataverse. And you need to enable user impersonation for Dataverse. Now we'll navigate back to the Power Apps portal, and we will go to Settings and then Admin Center. Now in the Admin Center, we'll go on over to Manage. We will select our environment. We will go to Server-to-Server Apps, and we want to create a new app user. So creating a new app user, we want to select the Dataverse Access app, which we just created in Entra ID. We'll select a business unit, and we'll create that. Now we're back in the Azure portal, and we're going to create our function app. Now I already have created my function app, but I'll go through the create process with you. Now I'll select the consumption plan and select my resource group. If you don't already have a resource group, you can select create new. I'll enter a unique name. I'll say Ticket Help Desk Demo. Now for my runtime stack, I'll select .NET. And you should select the region that your Dataverse environment is located in. You can see it is creating a storage account with our function app. I'm going to leave the storage and networking settings alone. I'm going to enable basic authentication because I have encountered issues in the past when I do not enable basic authentication. And you can go ahead and review and create. Now I'm going to go back because like I said, I already have mine created. Our next step will be to include the OpenAI deployment, which our function app will call in order to determine the best agent to assign to a particular ticket. Now we are going to create our OpenAI resource. Now, I already have mine created, but once again, I will take you through the creation process. We'll select our resource group, and I will name this Help Desk AI Service. For the pricing tier, I'll just select standard. For our network, I'll leave it as all networks can access, and you can go ahead and select create. Now, once you have your resource created, go to your resource and navigate to the Azure AI Foundry portal. Once you're in the Foundry portal, you can go to Deployments and create a new deployment. Now, you can select the model that you feel would be best for this. Personally, I have just been using the GPT-4 model. Now you can go ahead and create your model deployment. I already have my deployment created, so I'll select cancel, and you can see I have my GPT-4 model right here. Now we'll want to go back to the Azure portal and go to our function app. Now in our function app, we'll want to scroll down to the environment variables blade. We are going to define several environment variables, including our Dataverse client ID, secret, tenant ID. Now you can find these under your Dataverse Access app registration, which we created in Microsoft Entra. Your Dataverse URL you can find in the Power Platform Admin Center, and it will just be under Environment URL. We also want to define our OpenAI API key and our OpenAI endpoint, which you can find in the Foundry portal. If you go to your deployment, you'll see your URI and your key. Now we are going to actually create our function in Visual Studio. So I will select create a new project. In the search bar, I will search for Azure Function. I'll select the Azure Function option and hit next. Now I already have my function created, so I will just leave my name populated as the function app 2, but you can name yours Help Desk or whatever you think is best. Click next, and I'll leave it as .NET 8. This is an HTTP trigger, so I will leave it at that. And you can go ahead and hit create. Alright, now that we have created our function in Visual Studio, I am just going to walk us through this code that I've already written and which I've also provided in the description. So the first thing that I do is I grab our environment variables from our function app, and I've also defined these environment variables in my local settings. Now we get the request body and we deserialize it into this ticket request class, which I have defined as having a ticket ID and a description. I've also defined various methods that we call, the first being predict category. In the predict category method, first we get the authorization header, and then we send this content which contains a message to our OpenAI deployment to classify this help desk ticket into magic, nature, or battle. And we also send the description of the ticket so that it can be classified. Now, we post this to our OpenAI endpoint. We get that response, we deserialize it, and we return the first option from that. In our getDataverseAccessToken method, we define these variables that we want to send, and these are just our authorization credentials that we're sending, and we get that response from our Dataverse endpoint, and we retrieve that token and we return the token as a string. Now in our getCategoryID method, again, we get the authorization header. We get a response from sending this OData query, which we have our Dataverse URL, and we filter this categories table so that we get the category name that equals this category name, which we have gotten from our OpenAI. Now, we get that result, we parse it, and we return the first value as a string. In our getAvailableAgent method, again, authorization header, and we have another OData query where we first use our Dataverse URL, and then in the query, we filter the agents table so that we get the rows in which the is available column is true and the specialty category ID value is the same category ID which we have retrieved. Now we just get that result, parse it, and return the first value as a string. Now our patch ticket method, again, authorization header, and we define our payload. So this is the columns that we want to take from our agent table and or our category table and post that to our ticket table from the columns agent ID and category ID, and from the tables agents and categories. We want our specific agent and category ID to be updated in the ticket table. So in our request, we want to patch it to the tickets table. Now it's worth mentioning that when using the schema name, it is pluralized, and when creating my ticket table, I initially named it tickets instead of simply ticket. Now Dataverse will automatically pluralize your table. So if you have a table that ends in an S, it will add ES. So now the name of the table which I have to enter in my query is tickets as opposed to simply tickets. And we have our ticket ID, which is the one we want to update. Now we send our request, and I have a little error handling here where if the response is not successful, then we log an error that tells us that the patch has failed, and we include the error so we know why it failed. And otherwise, we just log that the ticket has been updated successfully. Now that we have written our function, I'm going to click on the function in the Solution Explorer and press Publish. Now we'll select Azure, Next, Function App, Next, and I have my account linked to Azure, so I'll just refresh and we'll see our help desk resource group and click on our function app. Now this is going to create our publish profile, so we'll wait for that to succeed. Now we'll press publish. And just like that, our function app is ready. Now let's check out our published function in our function app. You can see it right there, assign agent to ticket Dataverse. Let's click on that. And we're going to want to test this in the Azure portal. So I'll just paste some JSON that I have. I've included the ticket ID and the description and some sample data, and we'll just run this and see what our response is. Now you can see that we've got an agent ID and it has correctly assigned the category as nature. Our next step will be to create our Power Automate flow, which will trigger upon row creation or update in Dataverse, and will subsequently call our function. Now we'll go over to make.powerautomate.com and we'll click create so we can set up our flow. We'll click automated cloud flow and we'll search for a Dataverse trigger. The one that we want is when a row is added, modified, or deleted. I'll name this flow agent assignment. Now we'll click on our trigger and we'll specify the parameters. We want this to trigger when a row is added or modified. Now the table that we want is our ticket table, so we'll find that. We'll choose our scope. I'll just say organization. And the columns that we want this to be triggered on is our description column. So we'll add the logical name for that column. And we'll add an action. The action that we want to add is HTTP. Now we're going to need our function URL, so we'll go over to our function app, click on our function, and click get function URL. Now we'll use our default function URL, copy that, and paste it in the parameters. This is a post, so we'll select post. And for our header, we'll specify that this is content type application/JSON. Now for our body, I will paste our JSON, which I used earlier, but I will replace our sample data with dynamic content. So for ticket ID, I will choose the unique identifier for our ticket table, and for description, I will click dynamic content and I will select description. Now we'll save that flow and we'll see how it works in our app. Now we're here in our model-driven app and we're going to want to create a new ticket. So for our subject, I will just type crystal ball, and for our user, I'm going to select Peregrine Took. I'm not going to fill out our category or agent columns, but I will paste a description and select a high priority. I'm going to save and close, and I'm going to refresh that so our flow has time to work. And then when I click on it again, you can see that our agent and category columns have been populated with the correct values. All right, now we're finished with our project. I hope this video could be helpful to you, and I will be providing more Power Platform and Azure related content in the future, so make sure to subscribe if you're interested.